What causes disease? Thanks to the great breakthroughs in modern medicine, we know that disease can be caused by a whole host of factors, from bacteria to eukaryotic protists to viruses to animals such as nematode worms to genes to environmental factors, etc. The people of the ancient world did not know this. And since creationists argue that the biblical passages referring to the natural world should be taken literally in a scientific sense, it could be asked how successful were the attempts to use the same approach to answer the question, what causes disease? There are a very large number of biblical passages which refer to disease. The majority of these refer to the divine displeasure which has resulted in the disease. This can vary from a nation which acted against Israel and therefore is plagued. This occurs in the Jews obtaining their freedom from Egypt. There is a passage where a plague results after David numbers his people, holding a census, etc. There are very lengthy descriptions of how priests interact with lepers in Leviticus 13 and 14, how a leper would go and present themselves to the priest, how the priest would treat the house, using the blood of a slain bird in the casting out of the leprosy, etc. But there are no mentions of the natural causes of disease, which in the modern world we use to treat patients. Many early theologians considered disease to be a divine punishment, or caused by demons, or caused by the gods worshipped by non-Christians. Augustine argued that all diseases of Christians are to be ascribed to these demons. Tertullian thought that not only did demons cause disease, but they were involved in successfully treating a disease. So a successful physician could be suspect of being in league with demons. Very often a saint won renown by being able to cast out the demons which caused the sickness, as in this case from Saint Columba. These attitudes persisted for centuries and were propagated by some who were profiting by selling items which would help dispel the demon-caused diseases. Martin Luther wrote a piece titled Whether One May Flee from a Deadly Plague, in which he argued that since diseases were sent as divine punishment, and since those of strong faith would not be affected, then the best course of action was to not flee, because one should rather submit to divine judgment. Since many believed that a disease was sent as punishment for something which had offended God, some would then offer their opinions on what it was specifically that offended God. Or if the disease was caused by a demon, then what was motivating the demon to cause the disease? Among the diverse mentions of divine punishment by John Knox, he included those who did not believe religiously as he did as a possible cause of the divine anger which caused the disease. Note here that the signs of malevolent magic include the symptoms of common health problems such as heart attack, stroke, appendicitis, and cancer. These tendencies of blaming disease on supernatural agents continued to exaggerate. Ultimately, these applications included blaming diseases on witches and on witchcraft, saying that the passing of a disease showed the benefit in killing a witch, blaming a child's death on a father who loved his child too much to the point where he neglected his religious duties. Blaming diseases on immoral behavior, even hair loss, could be a sign that the person was being punished for something immoral, etc. Given that in the book of Job, God gives demons the ability to afflict disease, and given that witches consort with demons, and given that the Bible states, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," many witch hunters took it upon themselves to try to trace disease to the witches who had caused it, and thus those individuals who should die and be punished for their witchcraft which had caused the disease. And so thus the outbreak of disease was then often followed by an indictment of witches who were then murdered. Other examples include the blaming of disease on the basilisk, which the Bible mentions, the blaming of midwives, even in the colonies of North America, for birth defects, and the tragic murder of Jews because disease outbreaks were blamed on divine anger at their presence, thus justifying their extermination. At the end of the 19th century, going into the early 20th century, Mary Baker Eddy and Christian scientists argued that what is termed disease does not exist, and that the spiritual causes of disease were far more important and far more important in the treating of disease than any physical cause. And thus, a number of physicians trained in this philosophy then applied it to their patients. Obviously, if some appoint themselves to speak for the divine, then they may attribute divine anger at whatever angers them. If they don't like the opera, a disease could be caused by divine punishment of the opera. If they don't like long, pointy shoes, which had come into fashion just prior to the Black Death's outbreak, they could blame a disease on that. In the 1980s, when the virus HIV was discovered to cause the disease AIDS, a number of individuals instead chose to blame the disease on divine anger and attributed divine anger to specific groups. One individual running for president in 1988 even claimed that the scientists who said that condoms could help stop the spread of AIDS were, quote, frankly lying, that it was simply a spiritual cause of disease.